The morning mist hung thick over Silver Lake like a gray blanket. Thomas Mitchell stood at the edge of his private dock, watching the water ripple gently in the cool dawn air. At 52 years old, Thomas was known throughout the city as a successful business owner who had built his fortune from nothing. His company made computer parts that were sold all over the world. But despite all his money and big houses, Thomas felt empty inside. He had never married and had no children. His days were filled with meetings and paperwork, but his nights were long and lonely. Thomas had come to his lake house to get away from the busy city. He wanted some quiet time to think about his life. As he stood there in his expensive suit, he noticed something strange floating far out on the water. At first, he thought it might be a piece of wood or garbage that had blown into the lake. But as the morning breeze pushed it closer to shore, Thomas could see it was actually a small wooden boat. His heart began to beat faster when he realized there were people in the boat. Without thinking twice, Thomas kicked off his leather shoes and waded into the cold water. The lake was shallow near his dock, so he was able to grab the rope at the front of the old boat and pull it toward him. What Thomas saw when he looked into that boat changed his life forever. There, curled up on a pile of wet blankets, was a little girl who looked to be about 6 years old. Her clothes were dirty and torn, and her long brown hair was tangled and messy. In her thin arms, she held 2 tiny babies who were both crying softly. The babies looked like they were only a few weeks old, and their small faces were red from the cold morning air. The little girl's eyes were closed, but Thomas could tell she was very sick. Her skin was pale, and she was shivering badly. All 3 children looked like they had not eaten a good meal in many days. Thomas felt his hand shake as he reached out to touch the little girl's forehead. She was burning hot with fever. When his fingers brushed against her skin, her eyes opened slowly. They were the most beautiful green eyes Thomas had ever seen, but they were filled with fear and sadness. The little girl tried to sit up, but she was too weak. She looked at Thomas with those green eyes and whispered in a voice so soft he could barely hear her, "Please, sir, don't hurt us. We didn't mean to come to your lake. We were just trying to find somewhere safe." Her words hit Thomas like a punch in the chest. He had never seen children who looked so scared and helpless. The businessman in Thomas knew he should call the police or social services right away. But something deep in his heart told him these children needed help immediately. The babies were getting weaker by the minute, and the little girl could barely keep her eyes open. Thomas made a decision that would change everything. He carefully lifted all 3 children from the boat, carrying them in his strong arms toward his house. The little girl was so light that Thomas worried she might disappear like smoke. As he walked up the stone path to his front door, she looked up at him again and said, "My name is Sophie. These are my baby brothers, Jake and Luke. Our mama told us to get in the boat when the bad men came. She said someone good would find us." Thomas felt tears in his eyes as he carried the children inside his warm house. He had never felt such a strong need to protect someone before. He gently placed Sophie and her brothers on his big leather couch and wrapped them in soft blankets from his bedroom. Then he called his friend Dr. Sarah Chun, who was a children's doctor at the city hospital. Dr. Chun arrived at Thomas's house within 30 minutes, bringing medical supplies and warm baby formula. She examined all 3 children carefully while Thomas paced around the room, worried sick about their condition. Dr. Chen's face was serious when she finished checking the children. She told Thomas that Sophie had pneumonia and a high fever that could be dangerous if not treated quickly. The 2 babies were suffering from hunger and dehydration, but they would be okay with proper care and feeding. All 3 children had clearly been through something terrible, and they would need lots of love and attention to get better. Thomas didn't hesitate for even 1 second. He told Dr. Chun that he would take care of the children himself until they could find their family or figure out what had happened to them. Over the next few days, Thomas learned how to take care of children for the first time in his life. He had never changed a diaper or made a bottle of baby formula, but he was determined to learn everything he needed to know. Sophie was too sick to tell him much about what had happened to her and her brothers, but Thomas could see the fear in her eyes whenever she talked about the bad men who had scared their mother. He hired a private nurse named Mrs. Williams to help take care of the babies during the day, and he took time off from his company to stay home with the children. Thomas found that he loved reading bedtime stories to Sophie and rocking the babies to sleep at night. For the first time in years, his big empty house felt like a real home. As Sophie got stronger and started to feel better, she began to trust Thomas more and more. She told him that her mother's name was Lisa and that they had been living in a small apartment in the city. Sophie said that some men had come to their door late one night, looking for her mother. Lisa had been very scared and had told Sophie to take her baby brothers and hide in the old boat that was tied up at the river behind their building. Their mother had promised to come find them as soon as it was safe, but she never came back. Sophie and the babies had drifted down the river for 2 days and nights before the boat finally came to rest at Thomas's lake. Thomas hired a private investigator named Mr. Rodriguez to try to find out what had happened to Lisa. The investigator discovered that Lisa had borrowed money from some very dangerous people to pay for medicine when the babies were born. When she couldn't pay the money back, these bad men had come looking for her. The police found Lisa's body 3 days later in an abandoned building across town. She had been killed by the same men who had been looking for her children. Thomas felt his heart break when he heard this news. He held Sophie close as Dr. Chin gently explained that her mother was in heaven now and wouldn't be coming back. The next few weeks were very difficult for everyone. Sophie cried every day for her mother, and the babies seemed to sense that something was wrong, because they cried more than usual too. Thomas did everything he could to comfort the children and make them feel safe in his home. He bought toys and clothes for all 3 of them, and he even hired a teacher to come to the house and help Sophie with her reading and writing. Slowly, the children began to smile again and to think of Thomas as their new family. Sophie started calling him Papa Thomas, and the babies would reach their little hands toward him whenever he walked into the room. But Thomas's happiness was threatened when Child Services decided that the children should be placed in foster care or put up for adoption. A social worker named Ms. Peterson came to Thomas's house and explained that since he was not married and had no experience raising children, the state thought it would be better for Sophie, Jake, and Luke to live with a traditional family. Thomas was heartbroken. He had grown to love these 3 children more than anything else in his life, and he couldn't bear the thought of losing them. He hired the best lawyer in the city and fought to adopt the children himself. The legal battle was long and expensive, but Thomas never gave up. He proved to the court that he could provide a loving and stable home for the children. Dr. Chun, Mrs. Williams, and even Sophie herself testified that Thomas was a wonderful father who had saved their lives. Sophie told the judge in her small, brave voice that she didn't want to live anywhere else because Papa Thomas was the kindest man she had ever known. After 6 months of court hearings and paperwork, the judge finally declared that Thomas could legally adopt all 3 children. On the day the adoption became official, Thomas threw a big party at his lake house. All of his friends and employees came to celebrate his new family. Sophie wore a beautiful white dress, and the baby boys were dressed in matching blue outfits. As Thomas watched his children play in the yard where he had once stood alone, he thought about how much his life had changed. The empty businessman who used to work all the time was gone, replaced by a father who had learned that love was more valuable than all the money in the world. Years passed, and Thomas's family grew stronger and happier with each season. Sophie grew into a smart and confident young woman who wanted to become a doctor like Dr. Chun, so she could help other children. Jake and Luke became active teenage boys who loved playing sports and spending time at the lake, where their father had first found them. Thomas still ran a successful business, but now he made sure to be home for dinner every night and to never miss any of his children's school events or games. On quiet evenings, Thomas would often walk down to his dock and look out over Silver Lake. He would remember that misty morning when he had seen a small boat drifting toward shore, carrying 3 children who needed someone to love them. Sometimes Sophie would join him at the dock, and they would talk about how grateful they were for the day that brought them together. Sophie told Thomas that she believed her mother had somehow guided that old boat to his lake because she knew he would take good care of her children. Thomas always smiled when Sophie said things like that because he believed it too. He had learned that sometimes the most important moments in life come when you least expect them. A successful millionaire who thought he had everything had discovered that he actually had nothing until 3 small children taught him what it meant to be a family. The empty house by the lake had become a home filled with laughter, love, and the sound of children growing up safe and happy. The story of how a millionaire found a little girl with 2 newborns sleeping on a boat became a legend in their small town. People would often talk about Thomas Mitchell and his 3 adopted children, and how love had transformed all of their lives. Thomas knew that he had been the one who was truly rescued that morning on Silver Lake. Sophie, Jake, and Luke had saved him from a lonely life and had given him a purpose that was more valuable than any business deal or pile of money could ever be. As the children grew older, Thomas began to understand even more deeply how much they had changed him. He started a charity foundation called Safe Harbor that helped other children who had been abandoned or were living in dangerous situations. The foundation built shelters, provided food and medical care, and helped find loving homes for kids who needed them. Sophie, even as a teenager, volunteered at the foundation every weekend, using her own story to help comfort other scared children who came looking for help. One particular case touched the whole family deeply. A 7-year-old boy named Marcus came to their shelter after being found living alone in an old warehouse. His parents had died in a car accident, and he had been surviving by eating scraps from garbage cans and sleeping under cardboard boxes. When Marcus first arrived, he was angry and scared, just like Sophie had been years ago. He wouldn't let anyone touch him, and he refused to eat the food that the shelter workers offered him. Thomas remembered how frightened Sophie had been when he first found her in that boat, so he asked if she wanted to try talking to Marcus. Sophie sat with the little boy for hours, telling him about her own experience and how she had learned to trust again. She showed him the room where he would be staying and promised him that no one would hurt him there. Slowly, Marcus began to open up, and within a few weeks, he was laughing and playing with the other children at the shelter. The foundation also worked with local schools to teach children about water safety, since so many kids in her area lived near lakes and rivers. Sophie gave presentations to classes about what to do if they ever found themselves in danger near the water. She would tell them her story and explain how important it was to stay calm and look for help. Many teachers said that Sophie's talks were the most powerful lessons their students ever received. During Sophie's senior year of high school, she was accepted to the state university with a full scholarship to study medicine. The whole family celebrated with a big party at the lake house, just like they had done when the adoption was finalized years earlier. Thomas felt so proud watching his daughter receive acceptance letters from multiple colleges, knowing that the scared little girl he had found in that boat was now a confident young woman ready to help others. Jake and Luke, now 16 years old, had developed their own interests and talents. Jake was an excellent swimmer and had won several competitions at the regional level. He said that growing up near the lake had made him feel comfortable in the water, even though his first experience on Silver Lake had been so frightening. Luke was more interested in business and technology, often helping Thomas with computer problems at his company. Both boys were honor students and popular with their classmates, but they never forgot where they came from. The twins often talked about their mother, Lisa, even though they had been too young to remember her clearly when she died. Sophie would tell them stories about how brave their mother had been to save them from the dangerous men who were looking for her. Thomas made sure that all 3 children knew that their mother had loved them enough to risk her own life to keep them safe. Every year on the anniversary of Lisa's death, the family would visit her grave and leave flowers, thanking her for the sacrifice she had made. As Thomas grew older, he began to think about what would happen to his business and his fortune when he was gone. He decided to leave most of his money to the Safe Harbor Foundation so that it could continue helping children long after he was no longer around. He also made sure that Sophie, Jake, and Luke would each receive enough money to pursue their dreams and take care of their own families someday. One evening, as Thomas sat on his dock watching the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and pink, Sophie came out to join him. She was now 22 years old and in her 3rd year of medical school. She had grown into a beautiful and intelligent woman who looked remarkably like her mother Lisa, based on a few photos the police had found in their old apartment. "Papa Thomas," Sophie said, using the name she had called him since she was 6 years old, "I've been thinking about something. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't been at the lake that morning when we drifted ashore?" Thomas smiled and put his arm around his daughter's shoulders. "I think about that sometimes," he admitted, "but I also believe that everything happens for a reason. Maybe your mother's spirit guided that old boat to exactly the right place at exactly the right time. Sophie nodded thoughtfully. I like to think so, too. I remember being so scared that morning, but when I saw your face looking down at us in that boat, something inside me knew that you were going to take care of us. Even though I was just a little kid, I could tell that you were a good person. Thomas felt tears come to his eyes as he remembered that first day. You know, Sophie, people always say that I saved you and your brothers, but the truth is that you three saved me. Before you came into my life, I was just a man with a lot of money and no real purpose. You taught me what it means to love someone more than yourself. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of Jake and Luke calling from a house. They were now 18 years old and would be starting college in the fall. Jake had been accepted to study sports medicine, inspired by his sister's career path. Luke was going to study business and computer science, planning to eventually take over some of Thomas's companies. Both young men had grown tall and strong, and they still looked out for their older sister just as she had once looked out for them when they were babies. Dad, dinner's ready, Luke shouted from the back porch. Thomas and Sophie both smiled at the sound. Even though the boys were practically adults now, they still liked it when the whole family ate together every evening. It was a tradition that Thomas had started when the children first came to live with him, and none of them wanted to give it up. As they walked back toward the house, Thomas looked once more at the calm water of Silver Lake. The old wooden dock where he had first pulled that small boat to shore was still there, though he had reinforced it and added safety railings over the years. Sometimes neighborhood children would come to fish from the dock with their parents, and Thomas always enjoyed watching them cast their lines into water and wait patiently for a bite. The lake house itself had changed quite a bit since the early days when Thomas lived there alone. What had once been a quiet retreat for a lonely businessman was now a warm family home filled with photos, artwork, sports equipment, and all the wonderful clutter that comes with raising 3 active children. The formal dining room where Thomas used to eat silent meals by himself was now the scene of lively conversations about school, friends, and plans for the future. Mrs. Williams, the nurse who had helped care for the babies during those first difficult months, had become like a grandmother to the children. Even though her services were no longer needed, she visited the family regularly and always remembered their birthdays and holidays. Dr. Chun had also remained close to the family, serving as the children's pediatrician throughout their growing up years, and watching with pride as Sophie followed in her footsteps toward a medical career. The legal battle that had once threatened to separate Thomas from his children seemed like a distant memory now, but had taught him important lessons about fighting for the people you love. He had used those same determination and resources to help other families stay together through his foundation work. The lawyer who had represented him during the adoption process had become a close friend and now served on the board of directors for Safe Harbor. Thomas often spoke at conferences and charity events about his experience adopting older children and sibling groups. Many people assumed that infant adoption was easier, but Thomas always explained that there was something special about welcoming children who already had their own personalities and memories. Sophie, Jake, and Luke had brought their own unique gifts and perspectives into his life, and he wouldn't have changed anything about the way their family had been formed. The business that had once consumed all of Thomas's time and energy was still successful, but he had learned to delegate more responsibilities to his employees so that he could spend time with his family. He had discovered that being present for the important moments in his children's lives was worth more than any amount of money he could earn by working longer hours. School plays, soccer games, science fairs, and family vacations had become the highlights of his calendar. As the family gathered around the dinner table that evening, Thomas looked at each of his children and felt overwhelmed with gratitude for the unexpected journey that had brought them together. Sophie was telling him about a difficult case she had observed at the hospital during her medical school rotations. Jake was excited about an upcoming swimming competition. Luke was describing a new computer program he was developing for one of his classes. The story that had begun with a millionaire found a little girl with 2 newborns sleeping on a boat had evolved into something much larger and more beautiful than Thomas could have ever imagined. It had become the story of how love can transform not just individual lives, but entire communities. The Safe Harbor Foundation had helped hundreds of children find safety and new beginnings. The family that had started with one lonely man and 3 frightened children had grown to include friends, volunteers, and all the other families they had helped along the way. Thomas realized that the most important wealth he had accumulated was not money in the bank, but the memories, relationships, and positive impact that filled every corner of his life. The empty millionaire who had once stood alone on his dock had been replaced by a father, mentor, and community leader whose legacy would continue long after he was gone. And it all started with a simple act of compassion on a misty morning when 3 children needed someone to care.